Hi, today I would like to have a small talk about the pathophysiology of glomerular disease. So when you first learn about the glomerular disease of the pathophysiology, you hear there's damage to the endothelial cell, podocyte, glomerular basement membrane. But at least for me, when I first hear about it, I have no idea how can I link them to the nephrotic and nephritic syndrome. Yeah, of course, I know that nephrotic syndrome means there's protein in the urine, and nephrotic syndrome means there's blood in the urine, but I have no idea at the time how can I understand it. So today I would like to try to explain that as simple as possible. As usual, we have to look at the cell structure of the glomerulus. So I always like to raise an example for you to more to understand the mechanism easier. So let's say there's a patient and you find there's protein in the urine, which we call it proteinuria. So now you have to think about which part of the cell structure is probably being damaged. So you can think of maybe there's damage to the glomerular basement membrane. Why? Because the membrane is always negatively charged. And as you know, the plasma protein is also negatively charged. So if the membrane is intact, there's no way for a negatively charged protein to pass through a negatively charged membrane. It's clear, right? Negative, negative, and negative. There's no way for them to come together. So if you find there's protein in the urine, so this probably the cell membrane is damaged. So now you can think of maybe the patient have anti-GBM antibody disease, as known as Goodpasture syndrome. So another example, if you find blood in the urine, which is probably the nephrotic syndrome, so nephritic syndrome, so you can think maybe there's damage to the endothelial cells, because like if you see the cells here, the structure here, the endothelial cells located here. So if this damage here, which means the blood inside can easily leaks out and goes into the filtrate, which is your urine, then you can see blood in your urine. So you can think of maybe there's endothelial cell damage. But also if there's damage to the glomerular basement membrane, you can also see blood in the urine. That's why there's not always nephritic or nephrotic. There's nephrotic syndrome, which have both the both protein and blood in the urine. And then if you see large particles which not supposed to be in the urine, but you find it in the patient's urine, then you can think of this probably there might be damage to the podocyte. Why? If you look at the structure here, you can see numbers of root pores here, right? So in between there are many small gaps. These small gaps are so small that they only allow small particles to go through, to pass in the filtrate to the urine. So if you find this one, you can think of maybe there's something attacking the podocyte. And when you see that, when you think of the glomerular damage, there's three big categories you can think of what causing it. The first one, metabolic injury, and I would like to emphasize of the glucose here. Glucose is one of the cause of the metabolic injury to the glomerulus, but you always have to think of when there's high blood glucose, then it means the patient is diabetic, right? And in a diabetic patient, they always also have hypertension in the same time. So they have two sorts of injury combined together, which means they are more prone to a kidney disease. So always have to remember the late stage of the diabetic, or not even the late stage, they always have kidney disease. And the first one, which in person I think is the most difficult one, is the immunological injury. There are two categories, which is the antibody mediated or immune complex mediate. The antibody mediate, which I gave an example of anti-GBM antibody disease, is one of the examples of antibody mediated glomerular nephritis. This works as like the antibodies binds to the antigen on the cell surface and causing inflammatory response and ultimately damage to the cell structures. And other examples, like if you saw a kid in the clinic and suddenly have kidney disease, glomerular disease from nowhere, then you have to remember, ask the medical history, especially is there any infection, upper respiratory tract infection, especially because when you find these kids, they have infection like 2 to 3 weeks ago or even a week ago, then you can almost confirm it is a post-streptococcus glomerulonephritis. This is also one of the examples of the antibody-mediated glomerulonephritis, which the antigens are planted as a result from the infection, and then the antigens like from the circulations, like circulating from the blood and ultimately comes to the kidney and then attached to the cell surface, and then the antibody finds it and then binds to this antibody, ultimately also causing immune and then it form an immune complex, then ultimately causing an immune response and damage to the cell. And the other one is the immune complex mediated injury. This one works extending examples like lupus nephritis, or as I mentioned, although I just have raised the examples of post-streptococcus glomerulonephritis is one of the is a type of the antibody mediated, but this also can be categorized under the group of immune complex mediated. As I mentioned, the antibody binds with the antigen, right? So they form an immune complex. So they can put in the category of immune complex mediated injury. So it's how it works. But usually the immune complex, they deposits on the cell surface, and ultimately they activate the innate or adaptive immune response, and that's another topic. But if you are interested, you can look about the innate and adaptive immune response. And then they activate the immune response and ultimately causing the damage. So this slide, I would like to try to explain how does the immune complex deposit on each cell location, ultimately causing nephrotic or nephritic syndrome. But please remember that this is not an absolute formula. So this is just for you to understand the mechanism behind easier, but this is not absolute. So something may not apply. Please remember that. So first we start at the immune complex. They deposit on the subendothelial space, which is here. And if you just look at the disease example here, for me, when I first look at them, it's quite difficult for me to memorize if this nephrotic or nephritic. So you have to understand it. If there's deposit in here, so it causes inflammatory response and cause damage. Let's imagine there's a hole here. So the blood can go into the filtrate, right? So now you can see blood in the urine. So now you understand how come this disease is nephrotic, right? And it's very clear. And then, yep, let's move on to the next one, the deposit on the mesangial cell. But unfortunately, this is the one I said we have to memorize it. So this one, I would say just memorize it better. And then the third one is subepithelial cell. This one is easier for you to understand. Like I explained before, here is the food process of the podocyte, and then the small gap on it. So once here is damaged, the small gap is no longer small, which means the large particle can now pass out freely. So which the large particles, I mean, is protein. So now you can find protein in the urine, which is nephrotic syndrome. It's easy, right? But some may ask how come, but still they will ask what is the mechanism? How come you not see any blood leak out in this disease? One of the explanation reason of that because of the fluid here in the Bowman's capsule. In the Bowman's capsule is the large amount of fluid flow here does not allow, like normally the fluid is falling out is filtrate out from the vascular lumen, is filtered out from the vascular lumen into the Bowman capsule, right? So here it's already a strong flow here. So if there's something wrong, it's difficult for the email compass to flow against this filtrate into the vascular space to cause further damage. So this is why it's only protein leaks out into the urine. And another explanation is that although there's damage on the subepithelial space, but still the glomerular basement membrane is still intact. So it's kind of like a barricade. It still helps to block the immune complex to further goes into the space, vascular space, to cause further damage. And the last one is this one is the most simple one. Like I don't even memorize it before I understand this theory, but like still there's a deposit along the glomerular basement membrane and causing anti-glomerular membrane disease. And this one is nephritic disease. Well, once you damage, the blood can flow out, right? But sometimes you can still find protein in the urine. So that's why I say there's no absolute, but like this one is just for you to understand the mechanism and help you to save the time to memorize the most of them. But still, I recommend you have to memorize some of the disease. And then, yeah. And here is the graph to explain what happened, why, how come the damage of the food process or the disruption of the glomerular basement membrane negative charge can cause the plasma membrane to cross outside into the urine. And yeah, this is the end of my share. I hope you can understand better about this nephritic and nephrotic syndrome. And thank you so much. And this is the end of my share.